issue if I can. Here's what we know. Failure to wear a mask in public after a warning from law enforcement officials is now a criminal offence in South Africa, including in theory for children. But seriously, we're not going to see toddlers spending a night behind bars if their parents break the law. With me now is attorney Tracey Lomax Nixon, who has applied her mind to the issue. Tracey, good afternoon to you and welcome. Unlikely, obviously, that children are going to be apprehended, but how much clarity is there when it comes to the law and the wearing of masks?
Not as much as we would like, which I think is understandable when people are under pressure to pass regulations. So when I was asked to have a look at this, I basically went back to first principles. The regulations are what we refer to as subordinate legislation. In other words, where they are in conflict with any act of Parliament, the act of Parliament would prevail. There's nothing in the regulations which stipulates that a parent will be held criminally liable if their child goes without a mask. And in the absence of an express provision to that effect, I don't think that we would be able to hold parents criminally liable. We've always maintained that in order to hold somebody criminally liable, there has to be certainty surrounding the consequences of their acts. And there just isn't that certainty in the regulations which are before us.
What
so I would be, yeah?
No, go, finish your thought.
I would be extremely surprised if parents were held liable for the criminal, for their children not wearing masks. I don't think it would be appropriate to hold them criminally liable.
Not only appropriate, I think we'd all be horrified if children were arrested. But nonetheless, there is an onus on parents to exercise some responsibility, I imagine. More broadly, Tracey, what happens to me if I'm caught not wearing a mask in public? What do I need to do? What is my recourse?
Well, the Act the regulations stipulate that you could be liable upon conviction to certain criminal penalties. So as with any crime, you would be caught, either arrested, which I think would be terrible overreach by the police. I would imagine that you would be, if they were wanting to take it further, you would be subpoenaed to court and asked to explain why you weren't wearing a mask at that particular stage. It would be prosecuted just like any other crime. What we are seeing in the regulations, though, is that shopkeepers and proprietors of public businesses are obliged to refuse entry to anyone not wearing a mask. And I think that is where we're going to start seeing a little bit more sort of regulation. It's going to be regulated more by the people providing access than by the police, I think.
And if a shopkeeper fails to enforce that, in other words, if people go into the store and they don't wear masks, what sort of penalties do they face then?
That's also not clear from the regulations, because the wording of the regulation in terms of Section 34.3 says that no person will be allowed to enter or be in, and then it specifies a number of buildings or public spaces. But it doesn't make any provision that I could find for the prosecution of anybody who does allow them in. I mean, ultimately, most buildings, unless they're government buildings or the like, are limited by the owners of that particular enterprise. But it's very loosely worded, and I think we do need a little bit more certainty from the department as to exactly what they intend and exactly what the consequences are for failure to comply.
Tracey, something that popped up in a report that we've just had from our reporter in Pretoria was about the legality of having to wear a mask if you're in your vehicle. Do I have to?
In a private vehicle, I don't believe that masks are required. There's nothing in the regulations. I know at one stage it was a requirement well, it's still a requirement in public transport, but in a private vehicle, it's not required. I think if you're in an Uber or something like that, a mask would be required. But there's nothing that I could find indicating that it would be required in a private vehicle, unless, of course, you are interacting with somebody outside of the vehicle. in which case you would have to wear your mask because there's a public interaction.
And just a final one. I understand that a lot of the wording here is vague, and thank you for articulating that for us. But was there a better way to do this aside from the punitive action that has been threatened?
I don't know that I'm really qualified to comment on that. This is such a... It's a question which canvasses so many areas, including education, including social norms. We're not exactly the most disciplined of nations. And I've always wondered how we would manage to do this when we struggle to enforce things as simple as traffic regulations. I think... I always prefer to think that you get more with sugar and education than you do with punishment and with criminal law. But I've also looked at the public and the behavior of the public, and I'm actually horrified at what some of my fellow citizens are getting up to and how they think it's appropriate to behave when there is a pandemic. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that.
Thanks for sounding the warning. Absolutely agree with you. Tracey Lomax, attorney, appreciate your time. Still to come.